Medfield TV, community shows.
It's on? Okay. Well, after all the snow we had in 2015, it seems funny that we had to wait until April 4th, 2016 to have snow out. But it happened, and Rob is here for his makeup presentation. Before we go into that, I want to have a few announcements that I wanted to go over. First, did everybody get their portal last Friday? The portal, the newsletter. Okay. How many didn't?
Electronically?
Yeah, electronic. Yeah. Would you like to sign up for it?
There's more chance to see the posters this way.
That's right.
If you did get your portal, there's a member survey in it, and we got a few responses. We got, as I said in the article, we got enough for to give us something to think about, but not enough for a mandate. And I'd appreciate it if I can get more responses to the that survey. We just want to serve you better. We're looking for the information here. Also in the portal, I announced the Historical Society's spring outing. We're going to the Framingham Historical History Center. It's on Edgell Road in Framingham, facing the Common, just north of Route 9 in Framingham Center. Framingham has a lot of history. It's a substantial operation. They have 3 buildings. They have a paid executive director, paid staff, and it's a population of about 70,000 people, and it's a town that's as old as Medfield, so there's a lot of history to it. It starts at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I would have preferred the morning, but they don't open until 1 o'clock on Saturday, so that's what we got. This event is free for paid-up members, and if you if you would like to go and you're not a member, we'd be happy to have you join and pay up the membership, and then you go in for free. Another thing is next month on June 18th, Saturday, Memo is having its annual Medfield History Day. Richard DeSorga will be there with the trolley to go around to 6 historic Medfield homes. Tickets will be available at the Needham Bank at the corner of Park and Main Streets. The Society, the Peak House, the Lowell Mason House, and the Dwight Derby House will all be open that day, as well as the tours. Now it's Rob's turn. He's been into history and genealogy for many years in Medfield. Are there any people here that are related to Rob? He probably knows, but even if you don't.
No.
No, okay. But his...
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet.
His greatest and best known recent work has been for Vine Lake Cemetery. The cemetery is as old as the town, but it had been neglected, even though it was recognized as one of the town's great historic assets. Back in 2004, I got a grant to do a preservation and maintenance plan for the cemetery, and in 2006, I got a follow-on grant to have some conservation work and preservation work done on the old section. And after that was done, Rob recognized the need for a Friends of the Cemetery type of organization. He's done a fabulous job getting the Vine Lake Preservation Trust off the ground, and he's introduced a lot of programs to enhance and promote and celebrate the Vine Lake Cemetery. And he's created a really beautifully written and laid out website and newsletter. But tonight, Rob is going to be talking about reading letters from home that his father sent to his mother during World War II. I haven't read any of them, but I've always been fascinated by letters from the front. These were sent home by very young, mostly men, who were alternatively scared to death and bored to death doing what was probably the most exciting undertaking of their lives. My interest in these letters really started 25 years ago when I heard the now famous Sullivan Ballou letter on Ken Burns' Civil War series. Does anyone remember that? It's the most beautifully written and moving letter I have ever read. And I say, when you get home, Google Sullivan Ballou, B-A-L-L-O-U. It's just wonderful. Rob is a great writer. I'm going to be interested to see if he inherited this trait from his father, or if it's a fresh-grown talent. Anyway, Rob, Gregg.
Thank you. I'm especially pleased to accept the invitation of the Society to present at tonight's meeting. So let's see. Please raise your hand if you've ever heard of World War II. Wonderful. We all have something in common. What a way to begin. This is a timeless story of a marriage and a family separated by the tumult of war, yet very much connected by the enduring love and devotion expressed through a husband's letters to his wife. From numerous stateside training sites to family billets in England, through a D-Day plus 28 landing on Utah Beach, to his Paris office regimen while serving in the United States Army Signal Corps, Burt regularly wrote or typed letters to Jinny. In these 486 letters, we witness a powerful story. Burt's longing for his wife and his family, his reactions to being a soldier, and his constant search for meaning, purpose, and direction amidst the anguish of war. 70 and some years later, I am driven to reflect on the importance and value of these letters as an historical and personal account of both my parents and my early life as framed by World War II. The photographs used in this presentation come from these sources. Those from Burt's own collection and those from his colleagues have no notation, while those from websites will have an asterisk in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. This story includes a variety of themes. We'll look at the events which brought Burt and Jinny together. Then his military history will provide the background for his training and deployment in Europe. Some attention will be given to his letters. All this is the background to tell us how Burt lived out his days in the Army, how he felt about Jinny and his family, what he did when he had free time, how his colleagues played a part in his military life, and his attitudes about the war. Burt returned home to live a productive life, and we'll focus some brief attention on our family life. And finally, I want to share my experiences which resulted from reading these letters. Let's begin with some background about both Burt and Jinny. Burt was the fourth and last child born to Arthur and Ida. His oldest brother Murray had died soon after he was born in 1912. His brother Donald and sister Arthena completed the family, which was dependent on Arthur, a Congregationalist minister. Having been born in Marlborough, Burt lived in that town as well as numerous Vermont towns where his father served as a minister. Life in rural Vermont is summed up in a few photographs from early childhood through a 1936 high school graduation in Brattleboro. While a student at Massachusetts State College in Amherst, Burt met Jinny. Jinny was the only child to Marie and Harold, who became known affectionately as Grandpa George by his grandsons. The three of them departed Connecticut in 1924 for the Midwest to help with Marie's health problems. In 1926, while in Oklahoma, Marie died from pneumonia at age 31. Harold and Jinny returned to Connecticut, where she graduated in 1936 from Bloomfield High School. Upon returning to West Hartford, Harold managed a horse stable business, which his daughter acquired significant horsemanship skill, but for an unknown reason, never manifested itself in her adult years. On 13 July 1941, Burt and Jinny became engaged. It was soon after this that letters became a frequent and necessary means of communication. In the chapel of Trinity Episcopal Church in Hartford, Connecticut, Burt and Jinny were married on Saturday, June 20th, 1942. Their honeymoon to Massachusetts and Vermont lasted a week before he returned to the Army, and she returned as a secretary at Dun and Bradstreet in Hartford. So let's begin with taking a look at Burt's military history. On 16 September 1940, Congress established the first peacetime draft in United States history. 50 weeks after that event, Burt was an instructor at the Essex County Agricultural School in Hawthorne, Massachusetts, when he was called up and reported for basic training in nearby Fort Devens, a place that was ultimately to come full circle in his military life. A most helpful benefit in documenting my father's military history was the fact that he wrote much of it in his soldier's handbook, which survives today. In it, he logged all sorts of information, from uniform measurements to his tours of duty. Tracking his journeys proved quite easy, thanks for his passion for detail and perhaps his hidden intentions for posterity. Burt was selected to enter the Signal Corps, and he was deployed to Fort Monmouth for his initial training. His career in the United States Army Signal Corps had begun. A date which shall live in infamy set in motion the events that now included Burt in a country at war. Some of his training now included pistol, gas attack, military court, and articles of war. Specialized instruction continued at Camp Crowder. And it was on his way there by train that Burt began his long tradition of letter writing to Jinny. He began a series of promotions, first to corporal, next to sergeant, then to staff sergeant. Burt returned east in the fall of 1942 to attend his preliminary officers' training as part of a large entering class. Upon graduation, Burt was commissioned a second lieutenant, part of a smartly disciplined section of officers. He continued deployment at Fort Monmouth while acquiring additional training, all the while attending specialized schools, this one at Camp Lee. In April 1943, Burt relocated to Philadelphia, where his training was in the Storage and Issue Agency. It was during this time that he acquired the organizational skills which were soon to be used on another continent. It was while my parents were living in Philadelphia that I was born. While stationed there, Burt became part of a close-knit team. Some of his colleagues were deployed to the Pacific theater of war, while Burt and other team members were headed in another direction. At 0600 on 31 March 1944, he embarked on the troop ship RMS Mauritania, destined for Europe. Having sailed for 8 days, Burt debarked at Liverpool. On Easter Day, he traveled by train to Cheltenham, where he was billeted with the Adams family. For 6 weeks, Burt enjoyed a warm and uplifting home life in a family with whom he was to establish a lifelong friendship. Rigorous training involved long marches, or what Burt called hikes, all destined to improve the physical conditioning for the next test. Rifle practice occurred even for soldiers in the Signal Corps. Although it appeared casual at times, what with British schoolboys enjoying the close-up camaraderie. The greatest amphibious operation in military history was launched on 6 June 1944. Burt sent this newspaper to Jinny and wrote, "Well, darling, this is it. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers came all these thousands of miles for this day, and it is here at last." On D-Day, Burt relocated to Bristol, where he was billeted with the Sennington family, Winifred, Baden, and 50-year-old Peter. An older son, Anthony, was already serving in the British Fleet Air Arm. Burt's unit started its long anticipated deployment to the continent by bivouacking for 5 days in Salisbury. It was from Southampton on the 1st of July that Burt again embarked on a troop ship, which laid over 2 nights in the English Channel. On Monday, 3 July 1944, Burt set foot on Utah Beach, 28 days after the initial landing on Fortress Europe. His unit came ashore on the landing craft vehicle personnel, otherwise known as a Higgins boat. His landing was much less eventful than the earlier one because of a gooseberry, a protective line of sunken ships that placed stern to stern, which allowed smaller ships to sail safely, avoiding the strong tidal currents which ran parallel to Utah Beach. This is the actual shoulder patch from Burt's uniform. The meaning of the patch is that the lightning bolt represents the Allies breaking the chains of Nazi oppression. The blue star is the emblem of the Service Supply Organization. Coming ashore on Utah Beach, 2 of his buddies paused for a moment's rest before the next order. Burt's unit remained at an assembly area until about midnight, when trucks arrived to deliver them England. He bivouacked at Cats, a town in the Monge district of Normandy, about 5 miles from where he landed. At the time, the battlefront was a mere 5 miles to the southeast of Cats. Burt wrote it his 4th of July letter. "We are in the backyard of one of their unique farms. The barnyard is the front lawn. The barn, shed, house are all one. Cows and chickens are underfoot pretty much, and it is all a queer scene with army tents, jeeps, officers and men running in and out, telephone lines in the midst of the farm." Soon after his arrival in France, Burt sent this newspaper to Jinny, revealing both a new attack as well as the fact of a new publishing site on the continent. On 9 August, Burt's unit relocated to Valognes, a town in the center of the Cotentin Peninsula. Life was still somewhat primitive, what with canvas tents and rain-filled pathways, but still a long ways from the condition of frontline combat. Burt's next promotion was given personally by one of his commanders, a man for whom he had the highest regard. While Burt was in Cats, Paris became liberated. The City of Light was to stay dark for a good many months until coal deliveries could run generators. Paris became the furthest inland site to which Burt was posted during the war's duration. Leaving behind Normandy after 71 days, on 12 September, Burt climbed aboard a truck convoy for a full day's trip to Paris, 208 miles away. He noted in one of his letters that because of that trip, he became the dirtiest he'd ever been in his life. During his Paris deployment, Burt was part of the Army Service Forces, as identified by a shoulder patch seen in numerous photographs. Initially, Burt lived in 2 hotels and later was billeted in the Swiss pavilion of the American University, seen in a period photo. For almost 13 months, Burt resided in Paris. On 4 October 1945, Burt departed Paris en route home. He had been away from his family for 650 days, during which he had written 474 letters to Jinny. After an 8-hour train ride, he arrived in Thionville, which had earlier been a depot for the relocation of Jews displaced from concentration camps. His next stop was at Conflans. He appeared to stay there for less than 4 days. Traveling again by train and commanding one car of soldiers destined ultimately for Fort Devens, he reached the ultimate staging area outside Marseille. Camp Calais was now the only staging area available in southern France for troop deployment. On 18 October 1945, he wrote his last letter to Jinny. From Marseille, Burt became one of many soldiers embarking for the trip back to the United States. Burt's ship was the USSR, a victory ship similar to this one. Burt never seemed to relax his discipline for writing. Here on the back of a photograph, he charted the daily miles and speed as it appeared the ship crawled home. It took 12 days for the victory ship to cross the Atlantic. Burt debarked at Newport News and was processed through Camp Patrick Henry and was separated from the United States Army on 3 November at Fort Indiantown Gap. Burt presumably took the first train he could to Hartford to be reunited with his family. I can only imagine the reunion that occurred when the train pulled into the Hartford station. Perhaps I was there, but for the life of me, I can't remember a thing. This was our family home, a place where Jinny had moved in November 1944. Burt was always proud, as was indeed his family, of his achievements, as represented by the actual ribbons from his blouse. Our family is very honored that the 3rd highest Army medal was bestowed upon our father in Paris during September 1945. He departed France before his citation was ever received, but we know from his surviving war buddies that General Rumbaugh presented the medal for meritorious achievement or service. A most recent surprise was this 2006 award by the Vermont Department of Veterans. Burt's distinguished military career ended ironically from where it began 18 years earlier at Fort Devens. However, it is from the window of his wartime letters that we look to examine how those experiences framed his and his family's life in 1944 and 1945. Let's shift our attention now to examining the letters. The letters began while Burt was on a train, and they ended almost 3 years later as he was about to board a ship. 3/4 of his letters are handwritten, while the remainder are typed. I found that these typed ones contained the most misspellings, simply because Burt didn't bother to cross out the word and then to retype it. All the covers for every letter still remain today. The letter pages have been unfolded, and each letter and cover now reside in an archival sleeve organized by months in an archival box. A few of his early letters from England were sent by V-mail, but Burt and Jinny both scrapped that plan when they realized that they had more to write than a V-mail page could contain. However, I am glad that my father at least undertook the opportunity to use what was a classic communication method devised for World War II. Here's an example of stationery commandeered when the German army hastily retreated from Normandy. When beginning his letters, Burt made reference to D plus whatever number of days had expired since 6 June, and he maintained that discipline until D plus 170. Here we can see a variety of the stationery that he used throughout the campaign. From this quote, you gain a clear idea of my father's frugality. This brief overview depicts the letter's journey over time. At age 7, I first discovered the letters while my brother and I were exploring in the attic. They were in a wooden box and wrapped by ribbon or string in monthly packages. When we quizzed our mother, she replied that they were letters that our father had written during World War II. At that age, I'm sure we were more interested in the new subject of war than the letters. Almost 10 years later, I recognized the box of letters in the second floor of our barn. This time, being a teenager, I asked no one about them, fearing that if I even read one of them, I would be full of embarrassment about my parents' intimate feelings to each other. In 1995, I asked my siblings for permission to keep the letters. Subsequently, I cataloged each one by its page count, date, and whether it was typed or handwritten. I have transposed all of them into Microsoft Word and began the project that we are now witnessing. But first, let's explore how the letters inform us about Burt's daily schedule. As you might well understand, the United States was at war, and security was again a primary issue with which Burt had to deal. I work during the day on things that I cannot possibly write you about and express any ideas about. So it narrows down to writing about my health, times after work, and the atoms. All I should ever want you to know about my work, so as to satisfy your curiosity and others, is that it was what I have been training for, and now that I'm doing in an active theater of war. Basically, I am a stock record accountant that has the training and responsibility to tell any brass hat just how much we have of this supply and how much we have a month later on that supply. Well, enough for that, darling. Up at 5:30 in the morning and to bed around 10:30 at night. Each morning at 8 o'clock, we have a staff conference with the colonel in charge of our section. We get the lowdown on the previous day's activities, how our troops have advanced, movements of supplies, what the new units and divisions are in, where the heaviest fighting is, and so forth. Gee, it is astounding to think that we are relatively so near to it. But then again, the skies are rumbling all day with aircraft, and the booming sounds like a thunderstorm is approaching. Naturally, it is worse at night, and you expect it will lift you right out of the cot. But I'm used to it, honey, and I don't notice it too much. Our own supply work is getting into full swing, and I'm right back at the job telling where and how much wire, radios, and so forth are at different supply points. My schedule isn't too tough, though I rarely will be through by 10:30 at night. Burt just mentioned his cot, so let's take a look at his home, situated in an apple orchard overlooking the coast of France. He wrote, "I wish I could send you a picture of my little home. I have got it real snug and comfy, though it is very small. I have enough room to set about all my clothes and equipment, it looked something like this. He had scrounged a metal frame bed, had dug out 8 inches of soil below the tent area, filled the foundation with straw, and dug rain trenches around the perimeter. Notice that the last items mentioned on his bench were his pictures of his family, as well as his use of 5 blankets. The first Sunday in France is about over, honey, but it hasn't seemed much like Sunday. The hours are the same as any other day, the work is the same, and the atmosphere is the same. I have made up my mind to do something special for Sunday. I have felt honestly quite badly and put out with myself for not getting to services. Over here in France, it's pretty hard to get away to walk a couple of miles to a Protestant service. So I've started to read the little New Testament I brought along. You can picture me sitting on my cot in my little tent, reading my Testament. He continues in another letter, I don't get around much, and it is about like working at any other place. We work and eat and then sleep. I did get in a few trips at first, but until all the countryside is cleared of mines and Germans, I'd just as soon stick around this sector. We are still losing men from these types of things, and the place isn't safe yet. We are pretty well habitized to living under these conditions. Every day is like the next, and we just go through the motions daily. But it's all a matter of getting used to it, and while this routine of sleeping, eating, working would have been unbearable a couple of years ago, I find it all right now. Freeman and Nadrowski and I have built a slit trench for our hot water heating. We use a large can and we heat it up for washing and shaving. It doesn't take more than 15 minutes to get a good can hot. It's a whole lot better than using cold water. All the while, I assure you, our baths are really sponge baths. Each gets all soaped up and so forth, and then one of us throws water on the other to rinse each other off. Kind of crude, but it works out very nicely. Afterwards, we wash out our underwear and fix up things for tonight. So we really have quite a life here together. Burt's daily accommodations improved dramatically at its next location. You can guess, honey, that I am in gay Paris. The location was secret, but today it was announced that we could admit that location. Truly a wonderful city. Already I have seen the big spots, such as Arc de Triomphe, the E Tower, can't spell it, honey, and many other famous places. We are located near the Arc and walk through it or by it on our way to and from work. On the back of this photograph Burt sent Jinny, he titled it, My Tools of War. You can certainly appreciate that in 1944, paper was the primary vehicle that carried information. However, we can safely assume today that my father would have a computer monitor on the table behind him. Right now, the whole Army and the war seem very far behind, and in truth, they are. One hears little about the struggles and news of war now. Things have slipped back to fairly normal times, and there seem to be few things that remind us the war and all its woes. The Army is pretty quiet now, and rather needless it seems. Here in Paris, there is no more saluting on the streets, so the last military vestige has been compromised. So there is practically nothing to remind oneself of the Army except for the uniforms and so forth. So it is all over, and most of the people don't really think of the Army as the military and so forth anymore. Once the war ended in both theaters, Burt's daily life appears to have lost some of its luster and discipline. In these last weeks of being in Paris, leisure time became more available than it ever had, what with his replacement on board in the office and his knowledge that he would soon be heading home. If we were in college, an entire semester's course could be developed from the contents of his letters about the feelings for home, but without that luxury, I want to highlight some of his more evident feelings. The best place to begin pointing out his feelings is to examine the greeting in every single letter. Burt began it identically. Jinny, honey. And his close always included a formula which began, all my love, Jinny, honey. Then a middle part which varied as the war went on, and a benediction which always asked that God bless and take care of his family. About 5 weeks after I was born, my father escorted me and my mother by train to West Hartford, where the two of us would stay for the war's duration with my grandfather and great-grandmother. Let's examine what Burt wrote in his first letter to Jinny upon that farewell. Thus it has come about that this date starts again a separation, a period of only letters, honey. I only hope, Jinny, that I can write good letters, nice ones. Please guide me as to what I shall write and say from time to time. I have made a promise to write you at every possible minute, and I shall undoubtedly be terribly busy all the time, but I shall set aside my Sundays for you, Bobby, and my thinking of home. Undoubtedly, we will often get impatient and distressed, but we will hold our faith and undying love. More sentiments from Burt. Every marriage must deal with finances, only in this case, imagine that their communication occurred by letters. The ensuing time delays made for protracted deliberations. Let's read what he had to say about these matters. I hope you will be able to align certain financial affairs pretty nicely after August 1st, honey. By then your check will be $200, and I am to supplement it monthly, provided I have the facilities to send you money. And I should. I do not worry as to our money. Nothing can happen that would for you to be cut off. I'm happy with my lot over here as father, and all my wants are satisfied by my small expenses for my rations and so forth. I titled this slide, Surprise, Surprise, Surprise. After numerous letters containing questions about such, Burt responds to Jinny, telling him that she is pregnant. Keep in mind that I am not yet 4 months old when he pens this letter. I have no worries but that you will be fine and healthy. Naturally, and I will always feel a little worried and alarmed, but that is only human, at least with me. Likewise, Bobby is a good little chap, and will undoubtedly get through all his coming stages of growth and childhood okay. By the way, Jinny, honey, did we save one of the 3 baby books we got for Linda? That, sweetheart, is the identity of the coming offspring. Do I surprise you, honey? Or am I being a bit facetious? Not at all. I think we are to have a little girl, and Linda will be a good name. The great news came today, darling, and it almost swept me off my feet. It is wonderful to have, I think we're ahead of ourselves here. Here it is. It came today and swept me off my feet. It is wonderful to have another son. Gee, the news hit me right between the eyes. Primarily because I didn't figure that I would be getting news for 2 to 3 weeks. But this morning at 8:45, the cablegram came in, and I knew before I opened it that this was it. There are many things that I want to know about all at once. Gee, how does he look? Who does he look like? Does he have red hair? How much does he weigh? How do you feel? When did you go to the hospital? How long a labor was it? When was he born? And a host of other questions. Egad, I just sat down after the news this morning, smoked a cigarette, and sat still for about 10 minutes, just thinking. Egad, a sure, wonderful feeling, darling. Well, this person here certainly doesn't look like a Linda Christine, and what my father figured to be a certainty turned out to be otherwise. A son, Thomas Norman Gregg, was born 27 November 1944. The cable took 9 days to arrive in Paris. Earlier in August, they had settled on his name if by chance it would be a boy. Burt was in Normandy at the time, and the middle name was derived from that location. Later that spring, Burt seems to keep the door open, if only slightly. If we ever do have another child, it will be just for my actual wanting to be there at times to see it grow and develop. I sorely miss not seeing my two little sons in their babyhood years. This theme of whether or not to have another child was emphasized in numerous letters throughout the spring and early summer of 1945. Burt not only sent letters, but often small expressions were included as well in the envelopes. Here's an example from his first Mother's Day away from Jinny. Burt even sent Jinny money, although its value was never realized at a local bank. Burt not only sent letters, but often small expressions. Here is another letter he sent to Jinny to compare stateside news to what was happening a world away. Here's another example of how Burt planned for months in advance for his wife's special day. Even his two boys received mail. Jinny, too, took time to send her husband what we might now call care packages. For later edification, it was fortuitous that Burt detailed their contents in his letters. The box was tops and everything, honey. Everything found a special heart tug, I assure you. Awfully glad to get those cigars. They are a very good brand, and I'm sure imagine you'll have a little difficulty in purchasing them. Razor blades are always useful here, and I have a good supply for many months. I also like to keep a tube ahead or so of Barbasol. Already eaten 3 of the figs, same as you sent for Christmas. I like them a whole lot. The wafers, of course, fit in nicely. Never have read any of those books, so I'll get fine pleasure in reading them. Usually read an hour or so before going to sleep. Sure was swell to get it, and I am most grateful. And I can't thank you as much as I wish I could. Though I send money and pictures, they will never compensate with your wonderful packages. My father's moods swung back and forth as the weeks and months progressed. In this letter written in the spring of 1945 from Paris, he gives us a good example. It used to be that I used to write very intimately on Saturday nights. A year ago, I used to get far more lonesome than I do now, for some reason or other. All a matter of careful adjustment, I guess. But at times I do get real depressed, thinking of all the years we have lost. Of course, we have made a big start, and we definitely have our home and family started. But I used to think so much about becoming a vet or a good teacher of animal husbandry, having a position in a nice little place. What a hellish thing this war has been. But I am thinking more of the future than the troubled past. In all his 486 letters, Burt told just one joke. Here it is. An English lass and a typical American soldier were passing the greengrocers, who had some nice American oranges, only a few, for sale, as displayed in the small window. The couple went in, and each wanting one for their proposed walk through the beautiful English countryside, inquired as to purchasing some of them for that walk. To which the greengrocer explained that all the oranges were restricted to sale to expectant mothers. Not to be taken back at all, the American soldier quickly remarked and offered to his girl that, "Never mind right now, baby, we'll pick some up on the way back." This is the last sentence of his final letter. What more could we ask of Burt as he wrote letters, as his letters finally played out the timeless story of a marriage and family separated by war, yet very much connected by an enduring love? Now let's take a look at what Burt used to do with his free time. Right now there's a lot of real work to be done and I am very busy. But I do not intend to overdo myself and not take time for other things. About all I wish for is time to write you and to do a little reading each night. As we can see, soon after arriving at his billet with the Adams family, he continued his penchant for reading. Here is just a sampling of the books he read. I might add that each of these is briefly described when he notes them in his letters. One of the books that Jinny sent Burt was this one. And after reading it, he noted in his subsequent letters that the book made the rounds of his colleagues. I find it a real treasure today to have this actual book in my library. Burt tried to balance his private time with leisure activities spent with his colleagues. I enjoyed playing ball a lot, softball it was. Our team, or my side, won. We ran up a big score. The other side had perhaps the best players, but they were inclined to fool around too much. Our side settled down and I played third base. We only played about 6 innings, but we won by 15 runs. I made 5 myself with 2 homers. It was all good fun, and we almost split our sides laughing about the times. When Burt was stationed in Paris, he took real advantage of sightseeing. I took a long walk along the Seine this afternoon. The river has gone down enough for all persons to walk along the quays right on the riverside. These walks are well paved and have benches every once in a while. I enjoy walking along here very much. It seems so very different than most rivers in cities back home. Burt reveled in movie-going while in Paris. The ticket prices surely met his spending habits. Free admission for just wearing his uniform. I guess I have become pretty critical regarding movies, honey. But perhaps, rightfully so. They actually are a little better to spend one's nights. So far the time I've been in Paris, I've seen good, bad, and indifferent movies. But first, now let's explore what Burt used to do with his time with his colleagues. You guessed it, a USO show with Bing Crosby and Fred Astaire in Valognes, Normandy on 3 September 1944. Burt never reminisced about this. But once I read about his attendance at that show, I felt in some special way that my father had enjoyed a quintessential World War II experience. Burt wrote, "Bing Crosby certainly has a fine voice and is a marvelous performer, and he has done a great deal in entertaining the armies all over the world. Naturally, he sang one of my favorites, including at the end, White Christmas. Fred Astaire went through his many dance routines and was his usual self. However, Crosby carried the show from the beginning to the end." These gentlemen were Burt's chief buddies, friends, and colleagues throughout the war, their friendship having begun while members of Overseas Team Number 1. One of the real benefits that Jack Freeman brought was his ownership of a camera. Many of the photographs we see in the story were taken by him. These two Jacks and Burt spent many leisure hours and days together. Adding to the camaraderie was the fact that Jack Freeman and Burt were roommates in the latter months at the Swiss Pavilion in Paris. Pete Nadrowski became a good friend of Burt's while in Normandy and for some months in Paris before he returned to England. Once again, Burt enjoyed the benefits of Pete having a camera. Credit is given to him for taking many of these photographs as well. Burt was quite conscientious of Jinny about his travels within Paris and always mentioned which buddies came with him. The following photographs reveal some of his wartime sights. Thursday night, we planned to play hearts here in my room and celebrate my birthday and Petty John's wedding anniversary. There isn't much to have a party with. We do have our regular candy rations plus the Scotch whiskey, but both are in short supply. Burt went into some detail about his first Christmas away from his wife and family. I had bought a long loaf of real French bread, 5 francs, real cheap, but very delicious bread, somewhat like Italian bread, but not so crusty or hard. On it, we put boned chicken, warmed up lobster, jam, jelly, maple sugar cream, and anything else. Lieutenant White had received an immense fruitcake, very fine indeed, while Captain Macmillan had 2 bottles of champagne, really the best drink I have ever had. Here are his attitudes about the war. Burt talks for the first time about the war soon after he arrives in England. The head officers are very explicit in telling us just why we were sent over here in the war and just how we picture in this whole situation. The whole atmosphere is much more businesslike and efficient than Philadelphia. And there is little griping about assignments and duties. Everyone realizes over here that we are in a combat area. There is a tone of activity that you would never see in the USA. Tonight, just before coming back to the tent to write you, we had a little excitement, if you could call it that. A couple of Jerrys came over pretty high, but our anti-aircraft guns started opening up on them. A wicked barrage and the most noise I've ever heard in my life. We took good cover, I assure you. One Jerry got caught in a wicked cone of fire and was hit. He bailed out and the plane took off and crashed a few short miles hence with a big roar and flash. Jerry just drifted down, the war being over for that baby. Naturally, there was a lot of cheering and praise for our anti-aircraft boys. They did a good job. It is things like this that are really winning this war, and it is going on all the time. So I have been through my first real baptism, honey, and I am no worse off for it. And it was certainly good to see something like this. I have caught up grandly on the whole picture of things, and now that I have room to spread out my maps on the walls and really take a look, I have a good picture of everything. I have little pins all over the important advances. Thus, the map of Europe shows almost a complete circle of pins around Germany. And slowly but surely, I'll be able to draw those pins on across the map, closer to Germany, and finally move them all to one point, Berlin. Naturally, there is great speculation as to whether there will be a lot of fighting in Germany proper. But in my own mind, I do not have much doubt that there will be. It will be a bitter, resolute struggle right into the so-called fatherland. I feel that we are in for a tough winter, then a year of victory afterwards. It doesn't look as though things are going to break this fall. It's too big of a job to get over soon, and we'll have to plug away, as we have for the past 4 years. But it is sure a steadfast battle, honey, and there will never be any turning back. This morning at 6:45, we went to the surface train station for the train to the subways. A French woman was standing alone on the platform reading the newspaper. Roosevelt est mort, and the headline's about 2.5 inches. Of course, we couldn't believe it, but there it was. Then on the trains into the city, everybody knew or felt it. All our papers, Stars and Stripes, New York Herald Tribune, Daily Mail, had practically the same news and write-ups. Over here, we really don't get the real impact. Things in the Army just go on. And so at large headquarters, there isn't much in the way of kindred spirits or something. We have no flags to lower in wartime at half-staff, and officers don't wear the black armbands, at least not here. We are in what we could probably call twilight period. There is a vast amount of reorganization going on top side of the Army over here until it is ironed out and put into effect. We little fellows don't have a terrible lot to do. The routine work goes on, but we don't have the pressure we had prior to VE Day. I have few worries anyways. For months now, I refuse to worry or get worked up at the office about things. It doesn't pay. While I do guess I've lost a lot of my old initiative and drive, it hasn't hurt my efficiency at all. I have thought quite a bit, honey, about what the end of the Pacific War means to the people back home. To us, honey, it will mean I will be home sooner. So keep thinking of that, dear. To millions in the States, it perhaps more importantly means no more casualty reports and telegrams. The saving in life is wonderful. It would have been a hard road ahead for the men out here and for the people in the States. Today, what with the war over and so forth, they jokingly started to call me Mr. Gregg. But in my best school teacherish manner, I told them, starting today, my war with them begins while the other war ends. They got the gist in good humor and settled down to work just as they did through the entire European war over here. To this point, I've addressed the larger story as those lines have taken shape from the letters. Now the remaining 2 themes will be briefly explored. As you know, Burt did return home to be reunited with his wife and 2 sons. Our family remained in Hartford until the spring of 1946, when my father accepted a position to teach vocational agriculture at Bacon Academy in Colchester. My only memory of our life in Colchester, even though I was very young, was the day before Thanksgiving, when from the garage behind us, a live turkey escaped and flew into the bushes behind me. I'm pretty sure you can figure out how that story ended. 1 year after Colchester, we moved to Brattleboro, where Jinny and Burt lived for the rest of their lives. How ironic and fortuitous it was that my father became the vocational agriculture at his former high school. Burt had just two positions in his career: a teacher of future farmers through 1957, and a dairy specialist for a grain company until retirement in 1983. Indeed, he was able to right his vocational ship, which had floundered during the war, and find eventual fulfillment in lifelong goals. Burt's upbringing in a family where his father was a minister established a value system which was uncompromised by worldly factors. Here we see him teaching a church school class in the West Brattleboro Congregational Church. He was as diligent in his work with farmers as he was a clerk in the war, serving as the cattle superintendent for years at the Eastern States Exposition. From this photograph, it is plainly evident that Burt and Jinny's children did not remain at the count of 2 as agreed in 1944. A daughter, Faith Ann, was born to them in 1950. Just a little earlier from this time each year, my father journeyed to the garden to dig a crop of parsnips. We seemed to gorge on them for weeks, but then there was always enough for him to give to our neighbors. On the anniversary of his mother's birthday, my father died. Some months after that, my mother sold our homestead and moved to an apartment in the village, where she died in 1995. The family plot is around the corner from where they lived and raised a family for 38 years. I must say that every experience I had while working on this letter project was an unexpected one. First, I've had numerous moments of this feeling, most of them associated with the people involved in this story. Shirley Adams was 8 years old when Burt was billeted with her family. My parents cultivated a post-war friendship with Barbara, Shirley's mother, and it was through my mother's address book that I was able to locate Shirley a number of years ago. I surprised her with a phone call one afternoon, and since then our friendship has grown by sharing emails and photographs. My father's billet with the Sennington family was a complete surprise to me, never knowing about it until I read his letters. Peter was 15 years old when my father knew him, and trying to locate him today was like looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack. The availability of an internet phone directory produced one, and only one Peter Sennington in the entire United Kingdom. Off went a letter to him, and then it was my turn to be surprised when he called one supper time to announce that he was indeed the Peter Sennington for whom I was looking. Jack Freeman was one of my father's closer friends during the war. Many of the photographs we've seen were taken by him. Burt and Jack worked together in England, Normandy, and Paris, roomed together in Valognes and for some months in Paris, and spent together their days off. Using a Signal Corps Alumni Association book, I located Jack in Fort Myers, and we continued for a few years to enjoy frequent conversations over the phone. Jack Hagan was another close friend of my father. Again, using the Signal Corps Alumni publication, I found Jack with another surprise phone call. He was a single person during the war. And so I asked Jack why he bothered to associate as much with my father and Jack Freeman as he did, since both of them were married. Jack replied immediately and firmly that both these men believed in the sanctity of marriage, and that was all that mattered to him. What an incredible compliment, I thought to myself. Jack contributed much to the detail of my father's story. Once I saw this photograph, I became intrigued as to who I could find today that either was part of this group or was related to one of these men. While I haven't found a great many contacts, the few have been rewarding ones. Collectively, all these persons have contributed much to my satisfaction of knowing persons directly and indirectly involved with my father's wartime story. Yes, even a moment of this. Perhaps no one tells a story about their parents without a wee bit of sadness. Likewise, for me, no story about my parents, their early life together, and my first 2 years would be complete without expressing some regret for not asking questions sooner. Having read my father's letters, I am full of questions to ask him about the war and topics on which he touched slightly, about his times with his colleagues, and about his times of loneliness. I would want to ask my mother about me and my brother, how we dealt with an absent father, and how we behaved towards him when he returned home. To both of them, I would ask what it was like to say goodbye in March 1944, and what it was like to say hello in November 1945. Although we think our parents will live forever, the reality is they don't, and we make the best of what we have for memories of them, filling our lives with joy and thanksgiving. Here again, more value. In reading his letters, I discovered that my father called me by 5 different names. For whatever reason, Bobby never stuck. No one ever called me by the second name. Robert was used when my parents wanted my attention quickly. Rob remains the family and public name today, and the last one was used by my high school classmates. Jack Hagan provided a behind-the-scenes story about their bivouac in Katz in early July 1944. Since the battlefront was 5 miles away and air superiority was pretty much maintained by the Allies, and frequently a German plane would test that condition. As Burt described in one letter, which I didn't include, when 2 planes once appeared, the men dove for cover while the anti-aircraft guns took aim. What Burt never communicated to Jinny was that he had to sleep with his helmet on in order to prevent the spent casings of anti-aircraft ammunitions causing physical harm as they came back to the ground. It does appear, after all, that my father did find himself in harm's way. I became intrigued one night as to what the internet might provide when I queried cats. Not much, I found out, but what I did find out floored me, to say the least. The very house barn shed complex that was my father's work site was for sale. Using a translation site, I sent the seller an email in French telling him of my connection to the house. To my regret, a reply was never received. This complex was confirmed by Jack Hagan as their actual 1944 work site. I was also enlightened by present-day sites in Paris familiar to my father. First, we see how his billet looked in 1945, and then as it looks today. Not much of a change at all, except for a late model car. Burt was photographed standing by the entrance to his office building, and here is a view of it today. And of course, this. My father never knew about this honorable relationship. So I ask you folks, who knows the name of this newest cousin? I'll give you a hint. We've already seen him once in this story. FDR. Another remarkable but planned coincidence happened recently when Burt's granddaughter and my daughter Jinny chose to recapture a historical moment 62 years after it first occurred. And now the journey is complete as we have witnessed a timeless story of a marriage and a family separated by the tumult of war, yet very much connected by the enduring love and devotion expressed through a husband's letter to his wife. As I conclude this story, I'm left to ponder how today's technology would have altered the unfolding of this historical account. What a trip would be like to retrace my father's steps through England and France. How an author might be intrigued to write a novel using these letters. And what the impact this story will have in our family's future generations. But what I can say for sure is that I'm very pleased to have made this presentation to you and hope that it did enhance our collective objectives by informing us of the valuable treasures available in both military and personal history. Thank you very much for your keen interest.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
That's something to pass on to your heirs, I'm sure.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has been great. Thank you all for coming. It's a good turnout. And by the way, a lot of in the last issue of the portal, we had links to a lot of earlier presentations that you can see on Medfield TV. If you've deleted the portal, well, wait till next month. But if not, you can look at the link and see some of the things that you've missed. Are you in any of those presentations? I don't think so. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming.
The preceding was a production of Medfield TV, Community Show.